Right, welcome to today's session on reviewing the literature. Well, literature review is very important for every proposal or when you start writing your actual research dissertation or thesis. Now, what's the aim of this literature review is just to help you determine what your scope is, why your study is important. You can also set up your theoretical basis, so the theory that underpins your study. It will enable you to identify gaps in knowledge, and you could also capture current debates, issues that are relevant to enabling you to achieve your research objective and questions. When you do a literature review, you better understand the right methodology suited to your own study, and of course, you can develop relevant hypotheses as well. Now, when you review different literature, and obviously you should use really reliable sources from journal articles to books. There are certain great websites you could use as well, relevant to your subject matter, of course. So for those of you in HR, you could use a CIPD website, and other websites like Financial Times, The Guardian, good and reliable sources in general. Okay, fabulous. Now, when you have reviewed topics relevant to your research aim, so for example, you're looking at the impact of motivation and retention, your literature review will cover the subject of motivation and retention. Okay, and you want to find out what others have said about that particular subject and if there are differences in findings. So, for example, Kenny 2021 found ABC, and that's different from what David found in 2010. Perhaps it's the context or location where the study was carried out. That's why there is the difference, or it could just be the time frame. Whatever the case may be, you're trying to understand what's prevalent within your field. Okay, what's general knowledge? What are the implications? Are there different arguments to a particular issue? Okay, so that's what makes your work critical, rather than just saying this person said and that person said. So, what are the steps to conducting a good literature review? You want to start with your design. You want to know what's the need, why am I even doing this? Okay, and how would this contribute to knowledge? So from your literature review, you'll be able to find out, like we said, what exists, and then because you'll be synthesizing, you're not just regurgitating what everyone else has said, but you'll be making sense of what is within the literature from different maybe time, zones, contexts, whether the results contradict each other, whether there are certain trends you find, you know. And then from your design as well, you want to know what the appropriate method is. How do you want to search for the right resources? Do you want to do a systematic review? We'll talk about the types of review or literature review as a methodology in a second, or in our second video. But what's really important at this stage of designing is to know what the target audience is, what the appropriate method is, how you want to search for your review, your text. So if you're studying in the UK, your university would have a library online, physical library, most likely as well. All you need to do is go onto that platform and then key in the right terms. So if you're looking at motivation, for example, a number of articles will pop up for you to consider. Now, when you start conducting your literature review, you want to ensure that your search plans are really good. Do you need to adjust any? So maybe you started off with just Googling it, and maybe the sources you got are not giving you the required information that you need. You may want to consider maybe using a library, going into a library, using some books and what have you. Now, if you are writing a proposal, maybe for a PhD, and you don't have access to a good database of good journals and whatnot, you could still make do with Google and Google Scholar as well. And by the way, there are so many good resources online, some websites you could use, academia, And when you Google, you could also put in the keyword and use PDF. Okay, so those articles have been published open access. You'll be able to get good information from those for free. All right. Now, having decided on what materials to choose, you now need to know which ones to go for and how do you ensure that you get the right resources. So some documents may pop up online, for example, if you're just using Google, but you may have to pay for them. Is that something you're willing to do? Are there other articles that may be useful for you? Okay, so the first step, like we said, is design, where you're careful to know what you're looking at, why it's important. So, for example, you want to look at motivation, do you want to discuss the importance of motivation, the general impact on organizations, and then connect that to retention. And then you also want to cover the literature on retention, from why or how organizations retain their employees to certain factors that result in turnover and what have you. Okay, and then you carry out or conduct the literature review itself, get the right materials, and of course there's a place for reading, and that's where the analysis, you analyze and you read what you've the different materials you have, and then you analyze them, which ones are really important for your review. Not every material you read will be useful to your own research. Now, the information may be useful in general, it may be valid, it may be reliable, but the question you'll be asking yourself is, so what? Why do I have to include this? There's an interesting review one time, a script I was marking. I think it was a presentation where the student was talking more about the history of the CEO, a very great entrepreneur that didn't have money to pay his fees, and then his cousin helped him, and what have you. Now, all of that maybe factual. Those details and the life story of the man may be true, but were they really necessary? I don't think so, because the focus is more on the business, the company. That was a focus for that particular module. So for your proposal, you want to ensure that you're using, or you're focusing, I would say, on the right information. Because if you're just adding random things just because, well, it's information, then you've not done a very good literature review. Okay, so in your analysis, you need to be very proactive in deciding on what is necessary. Okay, now how are you going to document and report the process of how you did your review? This will also be very, very useful, especially when you start using literature review as a methodology for a systematic review, for example. Okay. Now, with regards to structure and writing up, every essay normally will have 3 parts. So for your literature review as a section in its own right, especially if it's a chapter 2 in your proper dissertation, you would need to start with an introduction. You don't necessarily have to say a literature review is blah blah blah. You don't need to define it. All you need to do is just tell us, like a menu, what we're going to, what your examiner or your reader should expect to read, or what you intend to review. Okay, and then in the main body you discuss the main points, and then you can have a good summary of everything else you've said in the concluding section. All right, so you want to be clear with your findings, what contributions you're making, perhaps how this review fits into your research objectives as well, or research question or hypothesis. If you have hypotheses, you need to give seasoned argument and show us how you arrived at your hypothesis as well. Okay. Overall, the point here is you need to know what should be included and what's not to be included. Ensure that the information you're providing is appropriate, is transparent. You're also very clear about your process of how you gather that data. If you're writing a proposal, well, at best, it depends on how many words are required. Most proposals are about 2,500 words, so your literature review could be around 8 to 1,000 words to make room for others, for other section from introduction to methodology and what have you. But the literature review in general is usually the chapter or the section, depending on what you're doing, that has more that takes up more word count, I would say. Okay, right, superb. So there are some tips and some links here for us, things that you need to be aware of, our do's and our don'ts. So these are the do's on this side, and we have don'ts on this side. So when you're writing your literature review, you need to write in paragraphs, use objective language throughout. So all of the I's, I think, I feel should not be there at all. What you should be having is the author, the researcher, if you need to. Otherwise, there are certain ways of, writing. For example, the aim of this paper is, the focus of this study is, the scope of, to ensure that you're not really very subjective and making it about you. Of course, you can have your voice in as well, but obviously there are ways of going about that. So, for example, it is recommended that, or one can recommend that. Okay, these ways, this kind of phraseology. A good website to look at that will be very useful for you is the Manchester Phrase Bank, and of course for spelling, grammar checks and whatnot, grammarly.com. And you also need to paraphrase properly so you don't have a high plagiarism score. Now, some of the don'ts: don't use bullet points, avoid slangs and unnecessary jargons, and don't be overly descriptive. When we cover a video on critical writing, I'll give you more insight on that. Do not copy and paste. I've talked about the plagiarism issue there as well. So for reliable sources, no wikis, and you need to include what's relevant to your subject matter, and then reliable in terms of if the source is credible, and relevant in terms of whether the discussion within that particular paper is relevant to your own work. And I would also say focus on more recent articles if you can. Obviously, it depends on the topic or of discussion. It's possible that if you're reviewing a theory by a particular scholar, maybe the proponent, you may need to go all the way back to when it was proposed and what have you, so that's understandable. Okay, so these are just tips for the first part. We're going to the second part in the next video, and I hope this is useful for you. The traditional review, you just need to get articles that are relevant and from a reliable source, and obviously those articles, you need to dig deep to not only say what the authors say, but actually, as it were, bring to the fore the implications, the relevance of that particular article to your own discussion, and make it clear how you are making a difference with that review if you can. Show the gaps in your contributions as well. Okay. All right then. So this will be it for the first part. Thank you very much for joining me. Yes, remember, start from excellence. In our second part, we'll be looking at literature review as a methodology in its own right. Stay with me and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.